Welcome, everyone, to the Leadership Autopsy, where we talk authentically about all things leadership. And I hope everyone is having a great day. So today I'm going to take you to a moment where I realized I was being a little bit too all about me as a leader. This was a story where I thought we were making a lot of progress as a plant. I was the plant manager, and we had a lot of issues. I thought we were making a lot of improvements in the culture, helping to stabilize. Thought I had a handle on all the issues. I had a plan. I thought it was a good plan. And then in one union contract negotiation meeting, I realized I was being way too optimistic. And I had to self-reflect and realize that the problem wasn't fully the team, it was me. So let's get into it.
1, 2, 3, 4.
So at this point, I was a second-time plant manager. There was probably about 75 people at this particular site. I would call a smaller site. And we had a lot of operational challenges, whether it was environmental challenges, safety performance wasn't great, our reliability on asset reliability was poor, constant cost pressure at the facility. But we had a good detailed plan, and I thought we were making progress. The metrics were moving in a better direction. So it gave me a false sense of security that I thought, hey, we're turning the corner. Then came the contract negotiation with our union, and that was my true wake-up moment. We barely were getting started. Maybe we were 2 days into the negotiation, and then I hear a knock on the door. And I was like, okay. So me and my HR partner look at each other. So we go answer the knock, step outside with my HR partner, and it was a female associate, and she was really upset. I was like, okay, well, what's going on? And she proceeded to tell us that she was upset because she heard rumors in the changing room that somebody was accusing her of having an affair with one of our supervisors. And this was happening in the middle of negotiations, pulling us out of negotiations because of this. So we paused the negotiation, tried to calm the individual down, try to settle things. I said, look, we're only going to be here hopefully for a couple more days. We were hoping that we could get out of this thing in 5 or 7 days at max. And then we would, let me dissect it, break it down, figure out where these rumors are coming from, and just ignore them from now. And we were able to calm the individual. So we got back to contract negotiations, and it was maybe another 2 days later. And this time it was in the morning. The other one was in the afternoon. This time it was in the morning, and I hear another knock on the door. This time it was a female associate. She was crying. I mean, she was physically, you could tell how upset she was. And she told me, I went to go put on my uniform, and somebody had crossed out her name on the uniform and wrote the word that starts with a C that you call women. That is not a good word. And I was thankful at that time that I got Botox, because I could imagine the expression on my face if I had not done that when she told me that. To say that I was aghast was probably an understatement at that point. There was no word I could think of in the Webster Dictionary that could describe all of the feelings and emotions that were going on at that time with me. And so at that point, I was really upset, and something snapped in me. And so I stopped the negotiation. I called the supervisor. I said, shut down the plant. Me and the HR partner at the time, we're going to come to the plant. We want to have a town hall, all hands meeting with all the associates. And so I stood up there. I was angry. I was frustrated. I just was emotionally charged. And I said, are we in a schoolyard? And I didn't yell, but you could tell that my voice was very stern. I was, upset, and you could tell it. But I was controlled at the time. And as I looked around the room, I could tell that, they weren't children in the room that I was talking to. I mean, these were adults. And, half of the people were like, I didn't had no idea what I was talking about. And when I proceeded to tell them about what had happened with the females associates uniform, they were their looks on their faces or what I would have been like, when I heard the news. And so the other half were upset because I was, basically, not talking to them as adults. And so, I was trying to figure out what was festering underneath. Where in the heck did this come from? I thought we were our metrics were improving. I thought the dialogue was improving. I had the president of the business come and walk the plant and said, it was the best he'd ever seen the plant. There were indicators to me that I thought we were improving. So the breakdown, it took me honestly weeks to really understand what happened that day. And as I started reflecting, I'm like, obviously I wasn't getting the right signals. And the right signals come from where you're doing the work, as close as to where the work is being done. To really know if you're making a true change. And so I realized I probably wasn't spending enough time on that floor. I was really focusing more on operations and the metrics than I was on the people at the time. And I was really trying to probably spend more time getting the team to understand me than for me to understand them. And it was because when I started reflecting, this plant happened to be in the far north, and I was from the South. I grew up in South Alabama. I'd spent, 12 years plus of my career in South Alabama, where the cultures and values they were just different. Something as simple as needing somebody to work overtime because we had an operational issue or I had somebody that called in sick. It was easy to find somebody to work overtime because in the South it was they thought, okay, that's fine. They built up this overtime pay, double pay sometimes if it's on the weekends. And you could get a new Ford truck by the end of the year. Up north, they weren't driven as much by that money. And it was more about they valued their personal time. And I just couldn't figure out how to connect what drove me and what I was brought up in the South to what motivated them in the North. And so, but I had to figure out, and realize that that's why I had not spent probably as much time on the floor because I just I couldn't figure out how to connect with them. And so, because I wasn't out on the floor, how in the heck could I model the culture that I would want for my leader and, building those relationships? It was very hard for me to understand that this culture, it was a reflection on me at the end of the day. I wasn't setting the right precedents. And so I had to make a shift, right? I had to take that reflection and turn it into some actions and what could I do differently going forward. So this is what I call the framework or the cultural reset triad that I implemented in my standard work and then and use that moving forward in my career. It was hard because I turned probably 50% of the organization I'd lost trust in. And that was really tough to swallow because once you lose trust in an organization, it's very, very hard to recoup from that, right? And I could only make a plan moving forward. You can't look back and say, oh, I regret this and I regret that. And, it just snowballs because you can't change it. So the best thing you can do as a leader when you make a mistake is reflect, identify what that mistake was, and then figure out how to pivot and just do your best moving forward to try to do that again and to learn from your mistakes. And so that led me to a simple framework that I still use today. One is presence before pressure. You really can't fix what you don't understand. That's what's important about going to Gemba where your team is doing work so you can really see what's going on in their day-to-day activities. So I can really better understand, not just through meetings, but really what is the work. Get your boots sturdy is what I call it. Be very intention focused, conversation heavy, but spend more time listening. I thought it was interesting. There was this in my third grade class, there was a sign on the wall that said, learn to listen and listen to learn. And that's so true. And it still sticks with, and every leader needs to remember that, is because you got 2 ears and one mouth for a reason. And you need to spend the time to listen and really learn about what your employees are telling you, because they're at Gemba, they're going to tell you what the problems are. So, and then you're not just observing processes, you're also observing people and getting to know them. The second piece of that triad was relationships before rules. Culture doesn't change just because you demand it. And what I had reflected on was, when I came into the organization, I was very clear of who I was as a leader, what my expectations were. I know I'm not a traditional leader. And so I tried to share and be as candid as I could about how my leadership style was. And then I was expecting my team to manage up to me, but I wasn't really spending the time to really understand them as a team, as individuals, that like I should have, because when you're looking at that relationship, you can't just expect your team to manage up or you to just manage down. It has to be a balance. You have to figure out how to work with your team to find that balance. And so, even though you can't enforce standards you haven't communicated, if you're not behaving in a way that I want, I'm approachable and to have that two-way dialogue, people are not going to understand truly what your expectations. They're just going to hear that this is your edict of who you are. So, and then the other one was understanding before expectations. So you can't really model a culture that you haven't defined. And what I mean by this is you have to spend the time in the trenches to really understand what's going on in the organization. And then you have to be able to map that to, okay, well, where do we need to go? And then define clearly what are those gaps. And how do I transition in a friendly way? Because you can't just go in and say, okay, these are my expectations. This is what you guys are doing. And by the way, everything you were doing bad in the past was bad, because that will definitely not get you very far. So you need to be able to find, how to leverage the activities that are going to bridge you from where you are versus where you want to be. And that's really, you can't do that until you go to Gemba and really see and listen to your employees. And that builds off of my first and second layers of the triad. So what's the application? I mean, what can listeners do today? If you're leading a team right now, especially one with tension, gossip, disrespect, my advice is, here's where to start. You walk the floor with very intention focused, really not there to solve their problems right off the bat. You're there to listen, get to know your team. And I like to, if I'm not just talking about in manufacturing and other meetings and other functions like finance, for example, I like to just pop up to some of their standard meetings to understand what's going on, because then I can hear them, what are the issues that they're having. I might, ask them a certain thing. Oh, you had an issue over here. Have you thought about this? More kind of what I would frame as kata coaching questions, but not me solving the problems for them, but maybe just bringing an alternative way of thinking to them as they're trying to navigate through obstacles, through their problems. Also, talk to your people as humans. I think it's so important as leaders for us to remember, we're not just W-2s, right? We are people that have parents that we take care of. I take care of my mother, for example. We have children that depend on us. We have brothers and sisters. We have grandparents. We're human beings at the end of the day. And so not just thinking of it, and that when I talk about having 2 ears and 1 mouth, it's about building that relationship, not just about doing all the talking and the problem solving, but really getting to know your team. I think that's what's so important for leaders to not forget. And then identifying those cultural differences. You are going to have expectations from where you came from. The first thing you need to do when you step into an organization is you really need to sit down and listen to where has the organization, and understand, I don't say just listen, but truly understand where's the organization been, and not just come in with this mindset of this is where what I've seen worked in the past, and let's just bring it over and copy it here. You'll see this in the book Good to Great. They talk about why a lot of acquisitions fail, because somebody goes to acquire a company and they say, well, this model worked in this area, so let's just try to plop it in this area without really truly trying to dive in and dissect how to, what's the web that I'm trying to pick up and move over into a new organization. And so take your time to really understand and be open-minded to, just because it was done a certain way in the past doesn't mean that that's how it has to be done now, but learn from your past experiences and how you can adapt that to make sense in your current situation. So those are a couple of small things that if I said for a listener what they could do today, again, walk the floor, talk to people as humans, understanding cultural differences of what you have brought in from your background versus where that organization has come through, and how you can kind of have them happy medium. Because culture is not a memo. At the end of the day, the culture is a mirror as you as a leader, and it reflects on you. So ask yourself, am I spending more time trying to get to know my team, or am I trying to spend more time with them trying to understand me, or trying, to solve problems for them versus seeking to understand? That day in the plant, when I shut everything down and had that conversation at that town hall, it wasn't my best day as a leader, 100%. But, it was through the reflection that helped me grow as a leader, is what I would say. And it forced me to look into the mirror, because it forced me to confront that the culture that was going on was something that I was creating, or I was, helping to, perpetrate. And it forced me to grow at the end of the day. Leadership isn't learned just from successes. And I think this is what my podcast hopefully will translate as people listen to it. And I want them to have fun listening to it and reflect on it, maybe have a couple of laughs as we go through this, because some of these stories are in retrospect, as I've been thinking about my career and some of the experiences, are pretty funny. But it's about learning from those moments that really broke you, or that you just couldn't believe happened to you. When somebody's knocking on your door telling you that, somebody wrote something on their uniform that was very derogatory. I just remember thinking, is this really happening right now? I cannot believe this. So that's what I would ask for you guys to when you start thinking about these reflections, is taking, one or two tidbits, and how can you reflect this on how you've led within your organizations, and what piece you can take away. So I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. Thank you for listening, and I hope you come back for more leadership real talk.
1, 2,